In this week's episode, we take a look at what I've learned in 40 years on this earth and how it has transformed my life, my health, and the way that I move through the world. There are so many things that we gain with the wisdom of age, and one really beautiful takeaway is I love who I am, and it's taken me a long time to get here. The more I love who I am, the healthier I become. I know that sounds crazy, but it's really true. Join me this week as we take a look at how that wisdom and age play out in your health and just what I've learned over the last 40 years.
Hi, I'm Adrienne Irizarry. I'm an Eastern medicine practitioner who is passionate about women's health and helping women live their best lives. My goal is to put you in the driver's seat of your health, offering period solutions for a symptom-free life. Statements made in this program are for educational purposes only and not intended as a substitution for medical consultation or advice. We do not claim to diagnose, treat, or cure any diseases. This podcast is inclusive and welcomes all gender identities. The focus of the program is on biological function, and we will use the term women throughout, but it is referencing physiological and social challenges for biology, not identity. Come as you are, I am happy you're here and welcome all performances of identity. I hope you find something helpful in this show.
Welcome back to another episode of the Reproductive Rebel podcast. I wanted to start this episode by talking about life. Actually, that will probably be the theme of the entire episode is life. But as I am sitting here on the doorstep of turning a new decade, I thought that my life musings would actually be a really great segue into this new chapter of my life. So a lot has happened in my 40 years on Earth. And as I look back at it, so many things from earlier on in my life have led me to the practice that I have now and the moment that I'm in right now. And if you had asked me like 2 years ago, if I was looking forward to 40, I would have laughed and run in the other direction and probably cried. The reason for that being that 40 just seemed so old to me. I couldn't believe that I was that close. I had a really rough go of it in my 20s. For those of you who have listened to other episodes of the podcast, the heart attack that I had on birth control happened in my 20s. A lot of personal struggle happened in my 20s. A lot of cycle dysfunction happened in my 20s. And when that chapter turned over into my 30s, I met the love of my life. I moved to a new place. I started a brand new life for myself as this chapter began. And my 30s, while in a lot of ways have been the happiest years of my life, they've also had some of the deepest heartache of my entire life, because this is really where the fertility journey became a huge challenge for me, and in ways that I didn't expect, and yet also became a really beautiful gift, one that I give to you guys week after week. So I thought that even though this episode will be short and sweet, I thought that this would be a really great opportunity to reflect on where I've come, where I'm going, how I've gotten here, and the wisdom that I've picked up along the way. So my 20s, I was just surviving, or at least that's how I felt at the time. I was just surviving. And those, I thought, were supposed to be the years of my life where I was thriving. And really, I wasn't. I wasn't from a physical standpoint. I wasn't from an emotional standpoint. And as I look back on it, I realized that one of the things that made me so sick Now, yes, I was dealing with undiagnosed celiac. I was diagnosed midway through my 20s. I had been in a couple of very unhealthy relationships. Like there was just a whole bunch of things that happened in my 20s that really, truly made me feel like I was just surviving. But a lot of what made me feel that way also was feeling like I needed to please everyone around me. I needed to be perfect. I needed to look flawless. I had to be the best at everything. I had to work really hard to prove myself, right? So if you think about some of the words that I'm using, I had to work hard. I had to be flawless, right? How many of us really feel like that on a regular basis? Or we look back at the younger years of our life and go, I really gave way too much of a shit what anybody thought. I know that I'm raising my hand as I'm recording this. And I know just from talking with women in my practice that so many of us fall victim to the needing to prove that we're worthy, needing to have our voice heard, needing to feel seen, right? All of these things are important, but we do it at the expense of our health. And I'm no exception to that. I used to work hard. I was raised in a French Catholic family where working hard was literally part of our DNA fabric. And I had to just prove that I was worthy. And I did this, or at least at the time, I thought I had to do this by being the hardest worker in the room. And as I've gotten older, I realized that work can look a lot of different ways, and it doesn't have to look like burning the candle at both ends. It doesn't have to look like, and it shouldn't look like, working beyond your capacity. I didn't know anything in my 20s about how to work with my cycle, and that I had certain parts of the month where I was going to be gifted with superhuman capabilities, but I was going to have parts of the month that I was going to feel tired. And all of those things were normal. I didn't know that at the time. And honestly, I saw it as a weakness because being able to maintain the same pace as my male counterparts became physically a challenge. And the harder I tried to swim against the stream, the harder I tried to work like a man and prove that I could do everything a man could do because I can do everything a man can do, right? I still believe that I can. I just believe that it happens in a different way now than I used to. So the more I tried to be something that didn't truly align with who I was, the sicker I became. The worse my digestion was, the worse my sleep was, the worse my cycle was. How many of you resonate with that? You think that you have to keep up appearances. You think you have to act a certain way, be a certain way, walk, talk a certain way, do your makeup a certain way, right? We all have these preconceived notions because of the contexts we grew up in of what things quote unquote should be or what we should do, right? But a lot of times we do these things at the sacrifice of ourselves. Because if we really slowed down and we checked in with our intuition or with that gut knowing, whatever you want to call it, and you go, does this feel good to me? 9 times out of 10, the answer is going to be no. I can think back to my 20s and remember vividly moments that my gut bells were going off and going, girl, don't do it. Walk away. I can think of several moments and I remember them as clear as if they happened yesterday because there was such a physical response to no, don't do that. And yet my brain, my small little ego mind, tried to convince me that it knew better than my body wisdom did. And you know what? I believed that jerk for a lot of my 20s. And when I stopped listening to that ego mind a little bit, now I didn't completely learn how to release the reins until more recently, but when I started to take a breath and give myself some pause and be like, does this feel good to me or does this not feel good to me? I found that things weren't as difficult and my body didn't feel like it was working as so hard in an uncomfortable way. And as I started being more expressive and not hiding my voice and not dimming my light for the comfort of other people, I am not perfect. I never claim to be perfect. I will never be perfect. I am perfectly imperfect. That is what it means to be human. We are not perfect. This misconception that perfection is achievable is bullshit. And I really truly believed in my 20s that I could be perfect, that I needed to be perfect in order to be lovable, in order to be worthy, in order to be accomplished. Needing to prove myself and prove my worth was such a big theme of my 20s. And I spent so many years of my life sick because of it. In my 30s, like I mentioned, I met the love of my life and things really changed. My 30s were the happiest years I had. They were the healthiest years I had. And as I went from 30 to 33, my perception of working hard, and what was important began to shift. And I left a corporate job at 33 to go out on my own and to make my own mark on the world. And I did that in part because I was working too hard and I was making myself sick. And we had several miscarriages at that point because I was working beyond the limits of my cycle. Okay, so my Saturn return at 30 brought about a new start in a new location. It was a new decade, a new location, a new relationship. Like so many things came into right relationship at 30, but I hadn't quite gotten out of that corporate America, you're supposed to live in spring and summer energy all the time narrative. And so, because I hadn't learned how to step outside of that box yet, the first, I would say, 2 or 3 years of my 30s, I was still on the sicker side of things. Like my health had improved quite a lot, my cycle had improved quite a lot. I was having like normal cycles, and I say normal in quotes because they were more regular. I was supporting and caring for myself differently. And I was still trying to work with female hormones as if I had male hormones because I didn't know what I didn't know, right? So the journey that I'm on now, right, this practice that I am so grateful to be working in every single day and the people that I support every single day really was birthed at 33. I walked out of a corporate job that was literally killing me. There was no compassion whatsoever for the fact that I was quite unwell as a result of their expectations for me to work 70 hours a week. I was having issues carrying. So we'd had several miscarriages at that point. We had started the Western fertility intervention journey at that point. And I realized that I needed to rest. Now, when I say rest, I laugh as I say this because for the first 6 months after I walked out of that very high stress, high demand job, I paced my house. I had no idea just how stressed out I had been. I paced in my house because I had so much energy. pent up in my body. I didn't know what to do with it. I felt like it needed to be constantly in motion. And I felt guilt around not constantly being in motion. I literally had to detox my system in order to start feeling like a normal human again. And when I did that, we got pregnant, right? So our primal brain can only survive or procreate. And stress is such a big challenge for women's reproductive health. It is such a big challenge. I not only sit here and say this as a practitioner, I sit here and say this as a woman who has literally dealt with it firsthand. And it's a big part of where this practice came from, where this podcast came from, where my story originated from. Is once I started moving outside of that, this is what society expects of me box. And I started really listening and checking in with, does this feel good in my body or not? I realized that so many choices that I was making just weren't aligned. They didn't feel good. I felt stressed. I felt overworked. Child's birthday parties were overstimulating and set me into panic attacks because my system had just been so overtaxed for so long. I was fragile in that healing process. And as I allowed myself to heal and I started building this practice, I saw my cycle become some of the healthiest I had ever seen in my entire life. I started having more energy. I started feeling more present with my family. So by the time I hit my late 30s, I look back at the earlier stages of my life and I go, screw advanced maternal age, because I'm literally sitting here healthier and happier and more aligned than I have been in my entire life. And another big piece that brought that into focus for me was really learning how to give a lot less of a shit. I was talking to friends of mine not that long ago, and they're a little bit older. They're closer to my parents' age. And one remark was, I'm too old to give a shit. Right. And I started laughing at the time, but as I started reflecting back on it, I started realizing, you know what? I'm headed there. I'm headed there very quickly because I feel freer and I feel happier when I'm true to myself. And being true to myself is for some people and not for others. And that's okay. But it took me a long time to get here. So think about everything that I said about my 20s. I was a people pleaser. How many of you listening are like, yep, I was a people pleaser. I feel seen, right? As women, we have a lot of these themes in our culture that we have to constantly live in spring and summer producing energy. We have to work as hard as our male counterparts. I know I've said this in a previous episode, but one really transformational moment in my life was my first professional job after I got my bachelor's degree, just as I was thinking about whether I was going to go for my master's or not. And I was working in a marketing department, and an assistant vice president in that marketing department came over to me and put something I had written, because I started as a copywriter, put something I had written on my desk and said, if you want to be successful as a woman, you think, you believe, you know, you never feel. And then she disappeared. Well, it took me a long time looking at this piece of paper for me to figure out what the heck she was talking about. I read it through. It was grammatically correct. It made sense. I read it out loud, right? Thinking that I had missed a proofreading error. And all of a sudden, the word feel jumped off the page at me. I had written this short article in a feminine voice, not in a masculine one. And that moment changed how I moved through the world for over a decade. because I thought in order to be successful, based on this feedback I had gotten from this woman that I had a lot of respect for, that I had to think, believe, and know. Those are all very masculine words. I wasn't allowed to feel. And as a highly sensitive, empathic person, that was really hard. And I spent a lot of my 20s feeling like damaged goods, like there was something wrong with me because I felt everything. I didn't know anything about being an empath at the time. I had no idea that the reason my emotions changed so often was because I was picking up on everyone around me. It took me a long time to figure that out. I was so grateful when somebody finally pulled the curtain back around that because it made me feel significantly less crazy. But that had an impact on my health because I felt like in order to be successful, I had to move through the world in a masculine energy kind of way. And God knows I tried. And I pushed myself and made myself sicker. And the face that I presented to the world was the one that I was told the world needed me to be, not the one that was aligned and true to who I was. Sure. Did you get to see parts of it? Yes, because I'm not a fake person. I've never been a fake person. I laugh from my toes. I had a boss once that used to say, "Oh, well, I know Adrian's in the building," because he could hear me laughing from downstairs, right? So I've always been authentic, but there was always this guarded element to it because I never truly felt like vulnerability and authenticity could go together. And that's one gift that age has given me, is the wisdom to see that vulnerability is actually an act of courage and strength. And it is not a weakness, although that statement from that executive made me feel like it was. And I internalized that. And for over a decade, I tried very hard to align with that because I wanted to be successful. And I realized that success, quote unquote, was coming at a cost, my mental and emotional health. And when I look back at it, I go, man, I wish I had the constitution at the time, the confidence in myself at the time to say something to the effect of, maybe in this industry, but that's not who I am. It took me many years to reclaim me, to learn how to listen to that voice inside of me again, and to move through the world in a heart-centered way. It wasn't that I didn't care. It wasn't that I didn't feel things deeply. I just thought I had to compartmentalize, and I wasn't allowed to show certain parts of myself to the world. And that's not the case. The parts that I had always been led to believe were weaknesses and things that you only allowed out in private company are actually the things that make me really good at my job. They make me really good as a practitioner. They make me really good as a partner. And the more that I lean into that, the healthier I get. And so I share all of these reflections because there are so many women that come through my practice that make statements like this and go, man, if I had only known this in my 20s, or if I had cared a little less when I was younger, I would have been happier or healthier or embraced fill in the blank opportunity that presented itself. But I felt like that wasn't going to work because, it made my heart happy, but was it going to pay the bills, right? Like I walked out of high school into that generation of people who were told you had to go to college in order to be successful and you had to essentially work like a man in order to be successful. And that has permeated our culture so deeply that it's created a lot of health problems. And the older I get, the more I realize that I really don't care what other people think of me because I am real and I feel everything deeply. And when I hold your hand and say, I see you, you can feel that I really truly mean it. I have walked through all of the fire that I have walked through in order to help you live your best life. I had a hard time to see those gifts for a little while. And by the time I hit my late 30s, I realized that in order to be well adjusted mentally, emotionally, physically, I had to start sharing what was on my heart. And my father said to me a few years ago, "Well, you've gotten really outspoken in your old age." And I laughed and I just looked at him and I was like, "Yeah, and I'm healthier now too. Thanks for noticing." And he didn't say anything else. I realized at that moment when he said it that other people were noticing that I was a lot more candid than I used to be, that I was expressing myself in a much more authentic way, and that it was having a positive impact on my health. And I've always been a very spiritual person. So here's the other part of 40 for me. I've always been a deeply spiritual person. I very much kept that in the closet for a lot of my life because I never wanted to offend anyone. I never wanted my opinions to, ruffle feathers with other people around me. But I realized that, especially as I stepped onto this journey as a holistic practitioner, that spiritual, emotional, and physical health and the holistic perspective is not just lip service, or it shouldn't just be lip service. It really does take all of those things coming into alignment in order to have the best expression of health. And so last season, if you've been following the show for a while, we started talking a lot more about emotions. I didn't feel really safe to express emotions for a big period of my life because I was judged, because I didn't feel like whoever I was expressing them to was essentially holding my heart, which was a very vulnerable place to be. I had a hard time trusting that they were going to hold me with as much care as I held them. And as I've gotten older, I realized that I had to hold that for myself and that it was okay to be vulnerable and authentic and cry in front of my kids. I don't hold my tears back. I don't go behind closed doors to do it anymore because I want them to see that being emotional is healthy. Expressing emotion is healthy. It is a vital sign of health. And denying feelings, emotions, all of these things takes our physical body out of alignment and will show up in the body. I think back to all of the period problems that I had. I had extreme period pain. Again, if you've been following the show, you know I have endometriosis, and period pain was a huge problem for me for all of my 20s. So, literally, from the time I started menstruating as a teen all the way through my 20s, period pain was an immense problem for me. Those are the years I didn't feel safe enough to share who I was. Yes, there is 100% a correlation there. I didn't see it at the time, right? Because hindsight's 2020, and all of my years of training to become the practitioner that I am today, I now can see that in retrospect. But that's exactly why I'm sharing these old lady musings with you. Because if you really are true to yourself and you take a look back at your life, the periods where you had the most physical ailments, migraines, period pain, clots, things like this, something in your life was out of alignment. And the more I tried to stuff who I was, which as a person who worked in a very extroverted kind of job, I used to joke I was an introvert masquerading as an extrovert because that was the demands of my job. But I'd go home at the end of the day and I would literally skid on my face because I was so exhausted from putting all of my energy out there. It's not that I don't like people. I love people, but I can only, like, energetically, I can only handle it in limited doses. And I saw that as such a weakness for such a long period of time. And now I realize it's an immense gift. Why? Because when I am with someone, I am present, I am engaged. You feel seen, you feel heard, you feel held. And that is a precious gift because there are not enough spaces where women feel safe and held and heard and like they matter. And for me, that is a huge part of the care that I provide to my clients. But I had to learn, as you know, if you're familiar with human design, I am a projector. I am a 6'2", so there is a massive hermit part to me. And again, if you know anything about human design, you'll understand that why 30, if you're a 6, your life is kind of divided into thirds. Why my 30s, like 30 and earlier, felt like a completely different chapter in my life. But all of that journey taught me what I needed to know right now in this moment to be able to show up and help clients, see clients, hold space for clients in the way that I can now. So there are always going to be parts of ourselves that we take a look at, and something in our environment says that it's not good or it's bad. Maybe it's a physical thing. Maybe it's the energy that we move through the world with, like me being an introvert. I felt like being an introvert was a kiss of death for such a long period of time because our world is geared for extroverts. And I realized that once I really truly honored the fact that my stamina was different, and that wasn't a bad thing, it was just who I was. It totally changed the way I was able to show up and hold space for people. It totally changed the way I was able to show up and hold space in my family. I yelled a lot less. I yelled a lot in my early 30s. I'm not proud of it, but I just felt not seen and not heard and not appreciated. And it's not that it was anything that my partner did. It was kind of collectively, like I was busting my ass at my job and it didn't matter how hard I worked. It was never enough. It didn't matter any sacrifices that I made for that role. It was never enough. And it made me feel like I was never enough. So it was bigger. It was situational, where so many aspects of my professional life really made me feel like I just wasn't enough. And so much of my feelings of self-worth were wrapped up in that. And I think that's been one of the absolutely most beautiful gifts of older age, is that I don't see them connected in the same way that I once did. I have value. I have worth. I bring all of those things to the table. And as long as I show up in a heart-centered way every single day, you can't go wrong. You're being true to who you are. You're being a compassionate person, but you're being authentic to who you are. Healthy boundaries is part of that. How many of us struggle with healthy boundaries, right? So this is where I was talking about the fact that I was really starting to resent my job because I just kept giving and giving, right? I didn't hold healthy boundaries. I didn't know how to. That's a beautiful gift that age has given me. I know how to hold healthy boundaries. I know what feels good in my body and what doesn't. I know where my limits are so that I can say with love and compassion, I don't have energy for this today. If you ask my kids, I've become notorious for saying that is a tomorrow problem. And it's because I recognize my limits now and I try very hard not to push beyond them. I am a worker. It is part of my DNA. It is hard for me to slow down and smell the roses. And yet, the more I do it, the healthier I get. I am healthier sitting here on the doorstep of my 40th birthday than I've been in my entire life. I'm happier with who I am. I'm happier in my life. My health is the best that it's ever been because I'm not denying who I am anymore. I'm not trying to suppress who I am anymore. And man, isn't that freeing? You feel so free when you just are who you are and accept that you are for some people and you're not for others. And that's okay because your energy will attract who you're supposed to be with, be around, work with, etc. I have learned to trust fall, which, man, wasn't that hard for me. But my late 30s, this is a skill that I have actually gotten pretty good at, and I'm proud of myself for that. It's hard to trust. And this is where the spiritual side of my life has really stepped forward, is I've learned to trust that if I surrender, what's meant to happen is going to happen. And for a long time, I couldn't relinquish that control. Remember what a shit show I said my early part of my life was? My 20s into the early 30s. Like the idea of surrendering control was anxiety inducing because control is a trauma response. And now I surrender and I trust that what's meant to happen, the people who are meant to find me, they'll find me. I put that intention out every new moon. Let me help the people who are ready for me, the people who need what I'm offering to find me. Because I desperately want to help and save the entire world, but not everybody is ready for this work. And as somebody who's listening to this program, you're stepping into being ready for this work. Maybe you're already there and you're ready to create change in your life. One of those things is fully accepting who you are and loving who you are, flaws and all. It's so freeing. And with that freedom comes space, comes health, comes alignment. So I sit here on the eve of my 40th birthday with so much gratitude and an overflowing heart. If you had asked me 2 or 3 years ago how I felt about 40, man, was I dreading this birthday. I was dreading it because it felt like an end to my fertility journey. I was dreading it because I just could never imagine myself as 40. It felt so old. And now I sit here fully ready to embrace this new chapter of my life because I've learned for the first time how to truly live. How to live, how to be free, how to be healthy. These are going to be the best fucking years of my life, man. Because I'm doing it as me and not some societal expectation of who I should be, how I should move through the world, what I should be producing every day. Screw all that. What feels good in my body? That's what's happening. And you know what? The truer I become to who I am, the better my work becomes, the better my relationship with my husband becomes, the better my relationship with my kids becomes. I'm able to have real conversations with my teenagers that I might not have been able to have otherwise. And at this really pivotal moment in their journey and development, it's so critical that they feel like they can talk to me. So my 40-year-old musings, I take you through all the challenges in my journey to this point because So much of what I've lived through, others are living and breathing right now. We feel like we constantly have to be in motion. We feel like we constantly have to prove ourselves. We have to be something we're not in order to be accepted or loved or worthy, or fill in a long list of bullshit reasons why we need to be something different than who we are. We were put here for a reason. Regardless of what you believe in terms of a spiritual system, or what you use as a label to define your spiritual life, it doesn't matter. We were put here for a reason. We have gifts that we are called to share with the world. And when we authentically live our lives from our heart, we come into right relationship with our purpose, our calling, what we're meant to do here. My calling did not come easy. It came with a lot of heartache. It came with a lot of times that I felt like I was in the dark and failing, from a physical standpoint with losses, from an emotional standpoint with jobs. Out of all of that darkness, and this is why I'm sharing all of this with you, out of all of that darkness, I've come into right relationship with who I am. And that has brought about a level of health in my body that I never knew I could achieve. So this is why I sit here on the eve of my 40s, so incredibly grateful to bring you things like Cycle Productivity Secrets, to teach you how to work in alignment with your cycle, to bring you things like the Holistic Women's Health Program, so that other people who want to practice the way that I do can bring this gift out into the world themselves. Everything that I create and I offer in one-on-one and teaching and small group sessions and all of these things is because I truly, in my heart, want to make the world a better place. And I want everything that I have been through, learned, done, suffered through to be transformed into a gift that others can take out into the world for the betterment of themselves and other people around them. That is what I was put here to do. So the 40s are going to be amazing. They're going to be the best years of my life. And as I take a step into my 40s and one step closer to my next 7-year transition, because in traditional Chinese medicine, if you were following last season, episodes 3 through 7, we walked through the phases of the cycle, and then we walked through the phases of life, right? Every 7 years, women's bodies make transitions. And I am on the doorstep of another one of those transitions at 42. And I do not fear menopause because I have learned how to find my authentic voice, how to take care of myself, and truly live in a heart-centered way. Menopause doesn't have to be scary. It doesn't have to be this big, bad, ugly at the end of the journey or at the end of the story, or it doesn't even have to be the end. In Chinese medicine, they actually call it coming into second spring because it is a new beginning where you transition from your fertile, life-giving years into breathing life into your years. It's a beginning. And I'm so excited to see what it brings me. So thank you for joining me this week and listening to my old lady musings, because the last 10 years have been some of the most transformational of my life. They've helped me get in touch with who I am. This practice was born, and I'm so excited to be here recording this episode, recording this program, offering you meaningful courses to help you transform your life in the ways that you want. I'm so grateful that you are here and part of this journey with me.
Thank you for joining me for another episode of Reproductive Rebel. Reproductive Rebel is recorded by certified peri-steam hydrotherapist and acutonics practitioner, herbalist, and Chinese nutritional therapist, Adrian Irizarry of Moon Essence LLC. If you are interested in setting up an appointment for one-on-one support, ordering from our store, or checking out our course offerings, visit our website at moonessence.life. Be sure to subscribe to our newsletter and get insider information on upcoming events and offerings. Join the conversation. Like and follow us at Moon Essence Me on Instagram, Facebook, or LinkedIn. Your voices make this program possible. Thank you all for your continued support.